Hello, and welcome to Skills Without Borders. This is a podcast where we are dedicated to share skills needed to break barriers for professionals in health, STEM, and public health worldwide. I'm your host, Dr. Andrea Clark, and today we have a special guest with us, the founder and CEO, Dr. Warren Marcus of Winx Therapeutics. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Marcus. I know you wear many hats. You have a long background when it comes to, immunology as well as biotechnology. But would you like to share anything else about your background before we get into the crux of, just some skill building techniques that you've used as a founder and CEO of a biotech company?
Well, first, thank you for having me. In terms of my background, I must admit it is a little weird. It's not your typical biotech background. I started off actually, if you look, both of my degrees actually say mechanical engineering. And so a lot of time people say, how's that? And so I think it really stems from the fact that well, there's that word STEM. It stems from the fact that I was actually, really good in math and science growing up. And, at 16, you don't know what you want to do for the rest of your life. But I won this thing called the Florida Power and Light Scholarship. That's our light company down here, Florida Power and Light. And they said that you had to either do mechanical or electrical if you wanted to win their scholarship. So I didn't literally flip a coin, but I said, let's try mechanical. So I started doing mechanical engineering work, and I actually was an intern at Motorola, this is back in the early 90s, so a good while ago. And one day I was dropping batteries. All day I was just dropping batteries, and I thought to myself, do I want to do this for the rest of my life? And so again, my young mind thinking that
Mm-hmm.
way. And then I said, I should probably combine this with something else. So when I went back to school the next semester, I looked around, and thankfully there was some undergraduate research that we could do, and I started looking for, something else. And so I
Mm-hmm.
ended up recruiting 50 people to strap them into a device, and it sent an electrical pulse over their quadricep, and it made them kick. And this contraption measured the amount of force that people kicked with.
Oh,
And so I
wow.
was actually helping what was she, a PhD student at the time. She was modeling this. She was creating a model for this, and I was like, wow, this is really interesting. Because again, she was ME, but she was doing kind of more biomed type stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
to make a very, very long story short, I ended up kind of going the biomedical route until ultimately
Mm-hmm.
I ended up in the molecular biology area.
Okay.
So it wasn't your most direct path
Mm-hmm.
to a biotech future, but it was. I like it because, to be honest, engineering is a great way to, I think logically. I think it's a great initial step to becoming a scientist, and so.
Mm-hmm.
There are quite a few mechanical engineers who've gone on to do all kinds of things. So it's a great initial base in which to start a STEM profession.
Yeah, because I think it trains you to think in such a pragmatic and systematic way whenever you have kind of that engineering foundation. And you're right, I'm very impressed that at such a young age you were already mapping out, can I foresee myself doing this for the rest of my life? But with that exposure in the mechanical engineering arena, it still kind of gave you a springboard as you evolved and grew as a professional. Thank you for sharing that fantastic background. How long have you been in the field collectively?
So I would say in terms of doing disease-based research, I started that in 2002. So, 23 years now. And now I will say I started in academia. So I was at Arizona State University when I started disease-based research. Everything before that was basic science. There was really no application to it. So when I really started focusing on the disease, it was Alzheimer's when I was at Arizona State. And then I left, in 2006, I left academia and said, let me go into industry for a while and see how that works out. Never look back. 19 years later, 19 years later, I'm still in industry, but I will say I got my start in academia.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that with us. I love the journey of your background. I think it's very unique, But I wanted to hone in on where we're at today in the STEM community. Essentially, I can't open my email or my phone without getting some AI update, some, new AI software that's in our systems, in our everyday work life, and in particularly in the STEM industry, with advanced gene editing, gene therapeutics, precision medicine. That was a big thing that we used to talk about a lot when I was at the National Institute of Health, is precision medicine and how the software can really enhance that practice. So, Dr. Marcus, can you give us an idea of where you foresee these developments shaping the future of medical treatment and patient care overall?
So the holy grail would be to really speed up drug discovery, drug development, and clinical development. And I can foresee AI having a huge role in each of those areas. It's been 25 years now since we mapped the human genome, and drugs. Actually, at the conference I was at yesterday, they were mentioning that right now medicines are finally coming out of that, that mapping of the human genome. And so using the data from that, collecting all of the clinical data that we've had over the years, I mean, I can see how AI could really help in both drug development side, preclinically and clinically. And so that's I think will be the key. It was also mentioned yesterday, on average, drugs take 17 years from initial conception to FDA approval is 17 years. And it was funny because then I started thinking of my journey and I realized, wow, I guess, yeah, in 2007 is when I first, I was a co-inventor of a drug. And so I think the first experiments that we did were in 2007 and the drug got approved last year. That's
Wow.
exactly 17 years. Now, I will say our case was maybe a little bit different. There were some things I think that happened once we sold the company that slowed things down a bit. So
Okay.
probably would have been approved a little bit quicker. But nonetheless, hey, probably every company can say that. So,
Yeah.
yep, 17 years. I think that AI, once we really, tweak it and get it to where it needs to be, and really, shrink that time, 10 years, five even. I mean, that would really be, I think, the holy grail.
Yeah.
Really quickly get medicines to people because, I mean, people are clamoring for more medicines. We have so many diseases in which there's just really, all we're doing is treating the symptoms. We need to be treating the underlying pathogenesis of these diseases. And that's, I think, what the future will bring with AI.
Oh, that's fantastic. Very exciting. I think your journey is very unique. I have a lab background, you have a lab background, and what I kind of noticed with the lab community, sometimes, like you said, the years go by and you're still in the lab. But what was very insightful and very interesting about you was that you were able to pivot in other areas, especially as a business owner now, drug therapeutics and development in your own right outside of the lab. And you're able to, I always call it a bubble. You kind of get stuck in the lab sometimes. And even if you grow and evolve and change, and you are looking to maybe break out into your own endeavors like you did, many STEM professionals may not necessarily see themselves as an entrepreneur because, all these years of publications and work and research, you really, I think, integrate your identity in that. So to do a identity switch and say, you know what, I can possibly be an entrepreneur and be innovative, like Dr. Marcus here. What skills or mindset shifts are necessary for scientists who want to move into the biotech startup space?
I want to say my case is somewhat unique, but it probably isn't. I should say how my journey was a little bit unique. So, yes, I was the one who was just happy to go into a lab, put on my headphones, and just do my experiments. Like I was all about the science, didn't care anything about the business side. Yeah, I had no inkling whatsoever to try to get onto the business side. And then something weird happened. A neighbor came up to me and he was actually doing like a multi-level marketing business. Okay. And he started talking to me about it. Initially, I was just like, I don't want to hear anything about this. But I said, you know what? Hey, let's. At the time, I was single. I had a ton of time. I had no kids, so I had a ton of time. And I said, hey, why not? Let's make some money on the side. And so he was talking to me about this business opportunity, and I started learning more and more about it. And I actually got into that business and was doing it on the side for a while. And I just started thinking to myself, well, I'm doing this in an area that I'm not that familiar with. I mean, I got to know more about it, but I said, how can I do this in the area that I know a lot about, which is the science?
Yeah.
And for a while, I was thinking, well, it's just going to cost too much money. There's just no way I can start a biotech company. Yeah, I just don't have the money for that. I don't know people who have that type of money. And so for the longest time, I think it was kind of out of the realm of possibility for me.
Mm.
And then I would say actually the next kind of impetus was when my son was born. And when he was born, I said, I got to do something different.
Mm.
I'm in this lab. At that time, I was in the lab for a very long time. I'm like, there's got to
Mm-hmm.
be something else out there for me that can help me, make more money for my family at that
Mm-hmm.
time. And so I started, I think right around that time, the chief business officer of my company that I was at retired. And so I went to our CEO and I said, hey, if you need any help on the business development side or anything like that, please let me know. And about a month later, he called me to his office and said, are you still interested in learning about business development? I said, yes.
Wow.
And so for about an hour, we had a conversation. He suggested a couple books, and I just remember I looked at a couple books and kind of just organically got involved in the business
Wow.
development side and really realized, wow, you see so much more of what's going on in the business
Mm.
at this level. When you're a scientist, it's all about that one experiment,
Mm-hmm.
or series of experiments, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a very small aspect of the entire thing. And you just see so much more, I think, when you're involved in BD and learning more about the business. So I think one of the things you have to do is understand that you have to want to learn business and not just science. And that's not easy. I gotta be honest, that's not
Mm.
easy for a lot of us scientists. I know a lot of scientists who are just very happy with being in the lab. I mean, even
Mm-hmm.
there were a couple of my colleagues at that company. They were very happy with being on the lab for 20, 25 years until they retire, and that's perfectly fine. I'm not saying there's
Mm-hmm.
anything wrong with that at all.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying if you have an inkling that you might want to do business, or start your own company, you really have to start getting interested in wanting to learn about business.
Mm.
That's the key mind shift right there. Without that, if you don't have that, then you're just never going to be able to become an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I agree. I agree on that wholeheartedly. And what I hear in your story is curiosity. You never, you in different levels, even when you were younger, starting in the field of STEM with the mechanical engineering background, growing into biomedical research, laboratory, you had a growing family. It was still some curiosity there, and you wasn't afraid to kind of follow that. But something more importantly that I heard is that a lot of time we tell ourselves no before we get started, right? So you had some trepidation there. You were like, how am I going to get this type of money? You hear the millions, you hear what it really takes to fund this. So securing funding is a major hurdle for biotech startups. What advice would you give to aspiring biotech entrepreneurs on attracting investors and securing grants?
I gotta be honest.
No,
This environment, in this environment, it's tough. I would
it's a
say
loaded question. Yeah.
everybody keeps telling me had I started this company in 2018, they would have been throwing money at me. I'm like, yeah, right. But I gotta be honest. Raising funding is not easy, but it goes in cycles. You
Hmm.
know, I actually think we're about to exit this cycle, this downturn. But yeah, over the last few years, it has been really tough in getting funding, and so to that end, you really have to structure your company as if it's already, if you're raising pre-seed money, you have to structure it like you're raising seed.
Mm.
Like for instance, we have a board, and most
Hmm.
companies at this stage typically don't have boards. But we said we're going to show that, we're serious. We're a serious company. We have, people dedicated to each task, have a board set up. I mean, we really made an effort
Hmm.
to say that, okay, this is a serious company. And so,
Hmm.
those are the types of things that you have to do now that you didn't have to do back in the day. Back in the day, it could have been just you and an idea and you'd get funded. But now you just really have to show that you're a serious company. Um, and then in terms of grants, there are actually companies out there that will help you with grants,
Hmm.
which is really good. I mean, way back in the day, I remember we wrote grants on our own. There was no one to help you. But now there are actually companies out there that will help you. Some of them will even, maybe for a very modest price initially, and then if you get funded, you may have to, give a little bit of that to them. But there are companies out there that will help you on the grant side. But
Okay.
in terms of getting funding from, let's say, angels and VCs, You just have to be persistent. I mean, and you have to network. So like as I mentioned to you before, I think before we started that, I've been at several conferences just this week, and it's all about networking
Mm-hmm.
because you just never know who's the person you're going to meet that can maybe give you the right introduction. You just
Mm-hmm.
never know. So you always have to network. I mean, I met you at a networking event, right? So there you go. So it's all about networking.
Yeah, and that's so interesting. Yeah, I met and I was actually about to leave, and I said, "Okay, let me get 10 more minutes. Let me go sit over here." And then just so happened, I met. We met. We start talking, and then
Yep.
here we are. So you're right. You never know who you're going to meet, and that's what's so interesting, Dr. Warren. I know you have a course on our upskill platform called "From STEM to Startup," where we give them that blueprint with your expertise and knowledge of different variations of different funding strategies that the future biotech entrepreneur can tap into. These are probably blueprints that you didn't have whenever you were starting out. You just kind of had to stumble forward, during that process. So that's really the good thing about the STEM to Startup course, is that essentially you're giving different brainstorming ideas that a potential founder and CEO can look into before they take that leap into their entrepreneurial endeavors. So that's always good to have a guide and just, this terminology, that once upon a time you probably wasn't abreast on until you built your business acumen in that space. So, speaking of the rigors of finding funding, learning business acumen, and just networking, as a scientist, entrepreneur, how do you balance the scientific rigors with the fast pace and demands of making sure your business is sustainable, scalable, and structured properly?
I will say this. I think biotech is an area where those two things have to have a little give and take. Normally in science, you want to be extremely rigorous, and that typically requires a lot of time to offer, that rigorous nature. And in a business, things tend to have to be very quick.
Hmm.
Decisions have to be made very quickly. You have to show your results very quickly. And I think there's a little give and take for both of those, especially in biotech. You know, yes, while you still have to be rigorous, I remember, as a postdoc, I would spend months doing, experiments. Well, yes, you have to speed up things a bit, and you just have to be in that lab a little bit longer, or you
Hmm.
just have to find out ways to move things just a little bit quicker. So you're not going to normal pace as if you were in academia. You're
Hmm.
trying to move a little quicker.
Hmm.
Whereas in business, when you want that really fast pace, you have to understand you can't get results overnight. Science moves at its speed, not at the speed you want it to. So, in that regard, investors understand that things aren't going to move quickly, so we're going to give you time. So there's that balance. So you
Yeah.
have to move a little bit quicker on the science side, but they understand on the business side and will give you that extra leeway and time that you need. So
Yeah.
that's the good thing. So it's a perfect marriage in that regard. And
Yeah.
it's one of the things in biotech that you don't really find in other sectors. Hopefully AI will help, really speed up things in that
Yeah.
regard, and which will make the business people happier. But as of right now, we can only go as fast as, as an experiment will move.
Yeah. It sounds like you have to be a little bit more agile in the process because
That is the
it's
word.
not just about
Agility.
being at the bench and working your particular project. You have to have insight on multiple cylinders, so you have to be a little bit more flexible in that aspect.
Yep.
As business owners, of course, as we're trying to just bridge those new paths, develop new skills along the way, what are some common mistakes that biotech entrepreneurs make when it comes to protecting their intellectual property? And how can they avoid these mistakes?
I would say the overwhelming amount of technology, that biotechnology that's being developed, comes out of the university system. So you're typically, it's in my case, that's what I did, and most, I mean, like I said, probably 99% of the time,
Hmm.
you're taking technology that came out of a university. And the great thing is that most of these universities have tech transfer offices that make sure that you at least start off on the right foot.
Hmm.
So if they happen to hear that you have something that may be interesting, they'll make sure that you patent. Now, after you take that technology out and you start developing it, there are things that you're going to now discover And a lot of times you're still in that science mind. You're like, oh, I found this really cool discovery. I need to go tell people about it. And so, you'll run off and go to, you'll submit your abstract, or, you'll go somewhere and start talking about it. And that's really where you can fall into a lot of pitfalls and danger. Because
Mm-hmm.
once it's out there in the public domain, you can no longer patent it. And
Ah.
so that is, I would say, the overwhelming majority of issues that arise around intellectual property. So you just have to be sure that at a minimum, put in that provisional patent that'll give you a year. It'll give you a year in which you can add to it, or do whatever to modify it. But you have to at least have that in there, because if you say something and even the next day you go and write a provisional patent and they find
Mm.
out that you mentioned it the day before, it's a no go. So I would say that is the major pitfall that I've seen out there.
Okay. Thank you. That's very interesting. So, looking back at your career, what are key lessons that you wish you had known when you first started as founder and CEO of at Wink Therapeutic?
A lot of biotech entrepreneurs, when they start out, they do it on their own.
Mm.
You go out and you're like, okay, I'm going to do this on my own, and yeah, I'll ask some people for help, but for the most part, I'm just, I'm responsible for this, and you have to have people that you can lean on to help you out. And so the biggest thing is, once I created my board, that really helped a lot. We can bounce ideas off of each other, and so that is the key thing there, because not all the times are you going to have a co-founder or co-founders that you can
Hmm.
immediately get access to. Like my co-founder is also a university professor.
Oh,
He's
okay.
very busy, and
Hmm.
so while we have a standing meeting every Sunday,
Mm.
even sometimes those have to be canceled. So,
Hmm.
but if it's something that I want to talk to, I can pick up the phone and call one of my board members and bounce it off of them. So, it's key to have someone people like that around,
Hmm.
or at a minimum, have a mentor. That's another thing. I didn't when I started off, I didn't really have a mentor per se that I could talk to. You want to ideally find someone who's done it, been there and done it. That's
Okay.
another, I would say, key thing that you really want when you start. And then legal. You just never realize it's not just IP. There are all kinds of other legal things. So make sure
Hmm.
you have someone good around that can help you on the legal side. And I understand that, you're hearing dollar signs right now. So you're
Hmm.
like, it costs money, but sometimes you can get legal help, you know, using equity. You can get a legal consultant and offer them equity. So
Hmm.
your best friend at the beginning is LinkedIn, where you can find people to help you. LinkedIn is your best friend, and
Yeah.
that is one of the key things. So
That's great advice. I wanted to get a little bit technical before we wrap up here. Where do you really see the biggest opportunities with biotech startups in the next 5 to 10 years?
I'm a little bit biased because I
Okay.
spent 12 years in oncology, and so I think, and I really, I just realized how tough cancer is, and so I still think a lot of the advancements actually will be used in those arenas. People like to use cancer as if it's one thing, and I think it's
Hmm.
over 200 different types of cancers,
Hmm.
and not all of them can you treat the same way. So I think over the next 5 to 10 years, I, in 2014 well, actually in 2011 there was
Hmm.
ipilimumab, or your brand Yervoy, that was approved in 2011, and then in 2014 we had Opdivo and Keytruda approved, and
Hmm.
I'd say those really paved the way for immunotherapies. There haven't been a ton since then, but I think the more we learn, more about different pathways and genetics, I think we'll discover more of these immunotherapies that can really help out a lot. So I'd say over the next 5 to 10 years, it'll still probably be dominated
Hmm.
in the cancer space,
Okay.
and also autoimmune. I think autoimmunity, that's another area where we're going to be doing a lot of work, um, trying to use immunotherapies.
That's fantastic. And I'm really excited to see where the technology and the science and the critical thinking and the collaboration between, experts like yourself and your team as well, your scientists that's hard at work in the lab, and how we really complement the AI and the technology as we move forward to build these very life saving drugs and treatments as we advance patient care holistically. Before I let you go here, this morning. What are two actionable steps a scientist or a STEM professional should take today if they are interested in launching their own biotech startup?
All right, so let's see. I'd say the first one is to figure out where your passion lies. I would say the very first time I started working on in a disease area was Alzheimer's. It's interesting because I would say at that time I wasn't passionate about it. It was just an opportunity that came up.
Correct.
Now you fast forward 15 years later, and my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and so at that time I'd have been obviously more passionate about it. But I would say when I first started off, it was something that I kind of stumbled into.
Okay.
After that, I actually worked in oncology, and one of the main reasons why is my dad he had five brothers and five sisters. He comes from a very large family.
Mm.
Unfortunately, he just has one brother now. So he's had four brothers pass away from cancer.
Wow.
And then his mom, and my paternal grandmother, she passed away from cancer. So it's hit our family hard, and so that was, I really got into that area. There was a passion behind it. Right now, I'm doing diabetes. Again, I watched my maternal grandmother go through all the complications that comes with diabetes, and so there's a passion behind it. So I'd say, the first thing is figure out your passion, because this is not easy, and there are probably times that you're going to want to quit. So, but if you have that passion behind that indication, you'll move forward. So figure out your passion, and then what was this? And then the second thing, you have to understand the business side. It helped that organically I started off, and so my CEO called me into the office and gave me some pointers. But I still, and I forgot to mention this, I actually still went and did a program, 17. It was a 1-week program called Business for Scientists and Engineers. And it's like you're drinking from a fire hose here. So they're throwing everything. It's like a mini MBA crammed into a week. But still, it gives you kind of the fundamentals, and you can go off on your own and really delve into the other areas, but the fundamentals of business. So you have to really understand the business side, because again, as scientists, we tend not to care, but if you want to start a biotech, you have to do that. So you got to find where your passion is in terms of the indication, and then go out and learn as much about business in general as you can.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. Like I said, continuous education. You didn't stop at your traditional training, the traditional, publication work or any research. You went outside of your comfort zone and said, okay, I have a skill gap here, and that's in my business acumen. So you were able to network with the right people. As you said, it was at that time was your boss, gave you books that increased your curiosity, and then you continue to kind of level up in those skill sets, right? So you upskilled and you got into programs, and those type of skills and actionable steps takes us from where we are to where we want to be. I would say the difference between where you are and where you want to be is typically the skills that you have or the skills that you don't have. So thank you so much for sharing that journey with us. Very insightful. I really learned a lot from your conversation. And most of all, your journey is so unique. I know you don't think it's unique, but I think it's very unique that you're so agile and open to pivot and go into those unknown spaces to essentially not only get what you want, but how you can serve the community with your skills and your expertise and your talents. So thank you so much for sharing your skills and your lessons with us on our Skills Without Borders podcast. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.